The first time I realized something was wrong, it wasn't dramatic. No shouting, no slammed doors. It was a pause, a hesitation that lingered a second too long, like a breath held without meaning to. We were all standing in my living room, the evening settling around us, and I noticed how Ryan avoided my eyes while Maya watched me too closely, as if gauging my reaction to something she hadn't said yet. Maya and I had been inseparable for years. She was the kind of person who filled space effortlessly, who spoke with her hands and laughed with her whole body. I was quieter, more deliberate, the one people came to when they needed steadiness. That balance had always worked for us. Until Ryan entered her life. Ryan was gentle, almost painfully so. He carried himself with a careful politeness, like someone afraid of taking up too much room. When Maya brought him around, I could tell she wanted us to like each other, not just tolerate, but truly accept. I did. Or at least I thought I did. That night, circumstances folded us together in a way that felt accidental but wasn't. The weather had turned ugly, my house became the obvious refuge, and suddenly the three of us were sharing a space meant for two. Candlelight replaced electricity, shadows stretching across familiar walls, making everything feel slightly unreal. Intimate in a way I hadn't prepared for. It wasn't jealousy I felt when Maya took Ryan's hand and led him down the hall. It was awareness. The kind that sharpens your senses and makes you notice things you usually ignore, the quiet after a door closes, the rhythm of footsteps overhead, the way your own thoughts grow louder when there's nothing else to drown them out. When they came back, it was clear something had shifted. Ryan looked embarrassed, Maya frustrated but composed. She tried to smooth it over with humor, but her eyes betrayed her. She wasn't just disappointed. She was asking for something. I didn't yet know what form that request would take, only that it would involve me in a way I hadn't agreed to. In a way that threatened the invisible boundaries I relied on to define who I was and what I would never do. As Maya met my gaze, silently urging me closer, I understood that this was no longer about a simple visit or a minor discomfort. It was about loyalty, desire, and the dangerous ease with which good intentions can blur into something else entirely. I took a step forward before I could stop myself, toward them, toward a choice I didn't yet fully understand, and toward consequences I would spend a long time learning how to live with. To understand why I didn't walk away that night. You have to understand who we were to each other long before Ryan ever stepped into our lives. Maya wasn't just my friend, she was my constant. We'd met in our early 20s, both newly untethered from the lives we thought we were supposed to live. Where I hesitated, she leapt. Where she burned hot and fast, I cooled things down. Together, we made sense. Ryan disrupted that balance in subtle ways. He didn't demand attention or challenge our bond outright. Instead, he hovered on the edges, eager to please, unsure of his place. Maya adored him for his softness, even as it frustrated her. She wanted passion, certainty, confidence. Ryan wanted approval. Somewhere between those needs, tension took root. I was married then, settled into a life that looked stable from the outside. My husband was dependable, kind, and increasingly distant in the way long-term relationships sometimes become when effort gives way to routine. We loved each other, but love had grown quiet, predictable. Safe. I told myself that was enough. That night forced all of those quiet truths to the surface. When Maya spoke again, her voice was careful, measured. "I just need you to be here," she said. "Not do anything. Just be here." Ryan nodded along, relief and dread crossing his face in equal measure. I should have recognized the manipulation in that phrasing, not malicious, but desperate. Maya wasn't asking for permission. She was asking for reassurance, for someone to steady what felt like a failing moment in her relationship. And Ryan, caught between shame and hope, clung to the possibility that my presence could fix what he couldn't. Inside me, conflicting instincts collided. Loyalty pulled me toward Maya. Boundaries warned me away. Curiosity, quiet, dangerous curiosity, kept me rooted where I stood. I watched them closely then, noticing details I'd ignored before. The way Ryan deferred to Maya's every expression. The way Maya softened when she sensed his insecurity, then hardened again when it resurfaced. They weren't broken, I realized. They were mismatched, both trying to force themselves into roles that didn't quite fit. And somehow, I had been invited, no, pulled into that fracture. As the conversation stretched on, the room felt smaller, the air heavier. Every word carried implication. Every pause demanded interpretation. I wasn't just an observer anymore. I was becoming part of the problem they couldn't name. When Maya finally reached for my hand, her grip firm and familiar, I understood the true conflict unfolding not between her and Ryan, but within myself. Between the person I believed I was and the one who might exist if I chose differently. I didn't pull my hand away. That decision settled quietly between us, unresolved, but irreversible, an unspoken agreement that this moment would not remain contained, no matter how much we wished it would. Once the line had been crossed, even tentatively, there was no returning to neutrality. The room held us in a fragile stillness, as if any sudden movement might shatter what little control remained. Ryan sat rigid on the edge of the couch, his hands clasped together, knuckles pale. Maya stood near him, projecting calm she didn't fully possess, while I hovered somewhere between them, uncertain of my role yet unable to step away. "This isn't supposed to be complicated," Maya said softly, though her voice carried strain. "We just need to slow everything down." Ryan let out a breath that sounded more like a confession than relief. "I don't want to mess this up again." The word again echoed. It told me this wasn't an isolated failure but a pattern, one that had worn them thin in private before spilling into my living room. I felt a flicker of sympathy for Ryan, quickly followed by discomfort at my own reaction. Empathy, I realized, could be a slippery slope. I tried to ground the moment, keeping my tone measured. "No one's judging you," I said. "Pressure makes everything harder." Ryan finally looked at me then, gratitude and vulnerability colliding in his expression. That look unsettled me more than I expected. It wasn't desire, it was reliance. And somehow, that felt heavier. Maya watched the exchange closely. There was relief in her eyes, but also something sharper, calculation. She was piecing together possibilities, testing boundaries without naming them outright. I'd seen that look before when she wanted something badly and feared asking for it directly. As the minutes passed, conversations circled the same points: reassurance, frustration, fragile hope. Yet beneath the words, something else was growing. Awareness. Of proximity. Of the way Ryan leaned forward when I spoke, as if my voice anchored him. Of how Maya's hand lingered on my arm longer than necessary. Inside, I argued with myself. I reminded myself of my marriage, of the quiet life I'd built on consistency and trust. I told myself I was here as a friend, nothing more. Still, another voice whispered questions I didn't want to answer. When had I last felt this necessary to someone? When had my presence alone seemed to matter? Ryan stood abruptly, pacing the room. "I just want one chance to do this without feeling like I'm failing." Maya turned to me then, her expression open, almost pleading. "Can you stay?" she asked. "Just for a moment longer." The request was simple. The implication was not. I nodded before fully weighing the consequences, aware that each small agreement tightened the knot forming between us. The tension no longer felt external, it lived inside my chest, coiled and expectant. As Ryan stopped pacing and faced us both, the room fell quiet again, charged, unresolved. I sensed that whatever happened next would not be accidental. It would be a choice, made consciously or not, and once made, it would reshape all three of us in ways we couldn't yet predict. The truth arrived quietly, without the drama I'd imagined such moments carried. No raised voices, no sudden confessions. Just a shift in understanding that settled over us like dusk, slow, unavoidable. Ryan stopped pacing and spoke with a steadiness that surprised us all. "I'm not just nervous," he said. "I'm afraid." He looked at Maya first, then at me. "Afraid of disappointing you. Afraid that if I don't get this right, I lose everything." Maya's composure cracked. She sank onto the couch, rubbing her temples as if the weight of his words had finally caught up to her. "I thought if we could just get past this," she admitted, "everything else would fall into place." Her eyes lifted to mine. "I didn't realize how much I was asking of you." That was the moment the central truth surfaced, not about intimacy or failure, but about need. Ryan wasn't struggling because he lacked confidence alone, he was drowning in expectation. Maya wasn't frustrated because she didn't care, she was terrified that love, by itself, might not be enough to hold them together. And I, standing between them, was confronting a reality I'd carefully avoided. I had stepped into their relationship not as a neutral support, but as a stabilizing force they leaned on when they no longer trusted each other to stand steady. That realization tightened my chest. I saw myself clearly then, not a rescuer, not an innocent bystander, but someone filling a gap that was never mine to fill. I think we're all pretending this is simpler than it is, I said quietly. My voice sounded distant, even to me. This isn't about fixing a moment. It's about what's missing. Ryan nodded, eyes downcast. Maya didn't argue. Silence stretched between us, heavy but honest. For the first time that night, no one asked me to stay. No one asked Ryan to try again. The unspoken agreement dissolved, replaced by a fragile clarity. We had reached the edge of something irreversible and, mercifully, stopped just short of denying what it meant. Maya finally stood, drawing a slow breath. We need to talk, she said to Ryan, not urgently, not angrily, but with resolve. Then she looked at me, a sadness softening her features. And I need to let you go back to being just my friend. The relief I felt was tempered by grief. Because clarity, I was learning, often arrives after damage has already been done. As they moved toward the door, I remained still, aware that the night had stripped something away from all of us. The conflict hadn't exploded, it had been exposed. And though nothing outwardly dramatic had occurred, I knew this revelation would echo far beyond this room into conversations yet to come, and consequences we hadn't fully faced. The days that followed were quieter than I expected, as if the night had drained all excess noise from our lives. Maya didn't call. Ryan didn't text. The absence felt deliberate, a pause meant to let the truth settle before we risked reshaping it into something more convenient. I replayed every exchange, searching for the moment where things might have gone differently. What unsettled me most wasn't what we'd said aloud, but what had gone unspoken, the subtle pull of being needed, the fragile power of being trusted when someone else faltered. I had always believed my values were solid, untested by temptation. Now I understood how easily conviction can blur when empathy steps too close to desire. When Maya finally reached out, it wasn't with urgency but with restraint. We met at a cafe halfway between our houses, neutral ground that mirrored the emotional distance she now insisted on keeping. She looked tired, older somehow, as if honesty had exacted a visible toll. We talked, she said simply, fingers wrapped tightly around her cup. About everything. I nodded, unsure what to offer without reopening wounds. He admitted he's been measuring himself against expectations he can't meet, she continued. And I admitted I kept moving the goalposts instead of asking what he needed. There was no bitterness in her voice, only clarity. It struck me then that the real rupture hadn't been that night in my living room. It had been the slow accumulation of unspoken fears that led them there in the first place. And you? She asked, finally meeting my eyes. The question was gentle but piercing. I chose my words carefully. I realized I don't get to borrow other people's problems to fill my own quiet spaces. She smiled faintly, a mix of gratitude and regret. I'm sorry I put you there. So am I replied, and meant it. We parted without promises. No declarations about the future of our friendship, no reassurances that everything would return to how it was. Some things, once seen clearly, refused to be unseen. As I walked home, I felt neither absolved nor condemned, just aware. Aware that restraint is sometimes the hardest form of courage, and that stepping back can carry as much consequence as stepping forward. The story wasn't over, not for Maya, not for Ryan, and not for me. But the next chapter, I sensed, would demand different choices. Quieter ones. Choices made not in the heat of uncertainty, but in the steadier light of understanding that follows when illusions finally fall away. Time has a way of clarifying what emotion distorts. Weeks passed, then months, and the intensity of that night softened into something more reflective, less urgent, but no less significant. I returned to my routines, yet they no longer fit as neatly as before. The quiet I once found comforting now asked questions I couldn't ignore. Maya and I rebuilt our friendship slowly, with intention. We avoided speaking about Ryan at first, as if saying his name might reopen a door we'd worked hard to close. When we finally did, it wasn't with blame or nostalgia, but with honesty. She told me they'd ended things, not dramatically, but with mutual recognition that wanting something badly doesn't make it sustainable. I thought love meant pushing through, she said one afternoon as we walked through the park. Now I think it means knowing when to stop. Her words stayed with me. At home, my marriage demanded a different kind of courage. I didn't confess specifics, but I spoke more openly than I ever had about distance, about complacency, about how easily people drift without realizing they're moving at all. Those conversations were uncomfortable, sometimes raw, but necessary. For the first time in a long while, we were choosing awareness over ease. As for me, I sat with the discomfort of my own choices. I had learned that boundaries aren't just rules we set for others, they're promises we make to ourselves. I hadn't broken one dramatically, but I had tested it, leaned against it long enough to feel it bend. That knowledge changed how I moved through the world. I listened more carefully to my instincts. I noticed when kindness risked becoming self-serving, when empathy edged too close to escape. I stopped assuming I was immune to mistakes simply because I meant well. The night that once felt like a fracture began to resemble a turning point. Not because it ended cleanly, but because it forced honesty into spaces where silence had lived too long. Sometimes, I still think about how easily everything could have gone differently. How one more step, one more word, might have rewritten all our lives. But I don't dwell there. Regret, I've learned, is only useful when it sharpens your sense of responsibility. What remains is a quieter truth. We are defined less by the lines we approach than by the moments we choose to step back. And sometimes, the most meaningful change doesn't come from crossing a boundary, but from recognizing it just in time, and understanding why it was there all along.